Well, as precisely on costs, so far the local authorities in the island and the Ministry of Defense have refused permission to UNHCR to set up a camp, and people are sleeping on the beach and in the parks and so on. So what kind of message Commissioner Avramopoulos and Vice President Timmermans are planning to convey to the authorities there?
Natasha will give you the latest.
So, as you know, we've been working very closely with Greece to assist them in the management of what is a very difficult situation to deal with. Yesterday, the Prime Minister of the new caretaker government replied to a letter from President Juncker and confirmed the government's commitment to prioritise work on managing the increasing refugee and migratory inflow into Europe. And we are counting on Greece to continue this important work in full knowledge, of course, of the difficult economic and political situation that the country is facing at the moment. There are still several measures that Greece needs to take, and Commissioner Avramopoulos also in a letter sent yesterday outlined what these concrete steps are, following up on his visit to Athens and his meeting with 5 ministers of the government, outlining how we can move forward on implementing the hotspot approach in Greece and on dispersing the funding, both the normal multi-annual funding that we have available for Greece as well as emergency funding.
Okay. Yes, please.
Your slightly barbed comments that you're getting the impression that some people are only just beginning to discover the text on migration put forward in May. Can you tell me who those barbs are aimed at, specifically?
Had I wanted to use something more specific than some, I would have done so. The fact that some refers to many of those around us who have chosen to attack, criticize, offer value judgments on things that we were the first ones to propose and put on the table. So I'm not going now to play this game of finger pointing because we don't want to do this. But as we're coming closer to this crucial week where State of the Union next week, summit a few days later, I think it's important that people take a look at what we proposed as a holistic approach for the migration problem in Europe, in our agenda in May, what we had already done before seeing what we're seeing now, namely that we tripled the resources in the Mediterranean, and as a result of this, things are not that bad now as they used to be before that. The fact that we have a proposal for relocation that is still pending. So this is something that I think is something that should make people look back, and it also would help people, especially those who find it very easy to criticize Brussels for everything, that we are determined to be very accurate, very bold, very swift on the rest of the European migration agenda. So this was the meaning of my initial comments. Follow-up.
Yeah. If you can't be more specific, maybe I can be a bit more specific. Angela Merkel yesterday in her press conference with Mariano Rajoy did appear to criticise the Commission, suggesting the Commission should be doing more. She went on to set out a series of things she'd like to see done, many of which are in the agenda on migration. Are you worried that senior figures across Europe are going to start criticising Brussels as a way to divert attention from perhaps their own domestic difficulties?
I got this question, exactly the same question yesterday, and I replied that nothing in what the Chancellor said we see as being against our policy objectives or our European agenda for migration or just what we want to achieve. Anybody else? Valentina, welcome.
Thank you, Margaritis. It's nice to be back. I have a question about precisely this. So you have a pretty much a cacophony of national responses, especially in Central and Eastern Europe when dealing with mostly refugees from Syria. So how about the Commission changing its approach into a more humanitarian response? Because clearly the national governments are not really coping with the influx, and one day they are stopping the people, the next day they are putting them on trains. It's all very random, and they also start to accuse each other of giving conflicting messages as to who is eligible to go where. So I realize this is national policy, but there is also room for EU policy in coordinating asylum. So are you looking at changing your approach, or are you sticking to your May agenda? Thank you.
Perhaps just a small reminder that we do already have a common European asylum system, something that I think needs to be repeated more. This is a very new area of European law, it's true, but it has been something that we've been progressively putting in place over the past decade. The last piece of legislation entered into force on the 21st of July, and as I was saying yesterday, this is now what we need to see implemented and put in practice on the ground. More generally, all of the tragedies that have taken place over this summer are a stark reminder that this is not a crisis that one member state is going to ever be able to deal with alone. It requires, it's a joint European challenge, and therefore requires a joint European response. So this is the method that we are pursuing, the communitarian method, and the right instance to discuss these things will be in the Home Affairs Council that has been called for the 14th of September.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Thanks, Margaritis. I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about May, sort of a follow-up from the previous questions. I mean, wasn't it the case that Juncker went into the meeting with the heads of state and government with a list of proposals at the emergency summit, and the member states basically told him to get lost? And if that is the case, will you say that?
I wouldn't agree with this graphic description of the of the European Council on Migration back in June. Back then, it is true that we were already seeing the early signs of what is now becoming a full-blown crisis in the Mediterranean. The President had the courage to very openly say what the Commission sees as a holistic blueprint for dealing with it. Member states, this is how the European Union system works, offered conclusions. We decided that some of these things were more urgent than others, the resources for Frontex, the relocation mechanism, but since you are a seasoned observer of press conferences in Brussels, you would remember that at the end of this European Council, President Juncker looked at you and said, "We shall be back." And a week later, in the European Parliament, he described the European Council response as timely, but not sufficient. So the moment now has come to complete the picture, and we're determined to do it. Bruno.
Yeah, back in May. May seems like a long time ago now. Very distant past in terms of the speed of the events that we've seen, particularly over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And those May proposals were temporary, and they were specific to Italy and Greece, and involved relocation of a mere 40,000 migrants, and we're seeing like sort of tens of thousands now every day on the move. I understand that the Commission's new proposal is for a permanent mechanism to deal with mass influxes. So given they're having the seminar today, they must be some idea, you must have some idea about the parameters of this discussion. It looks as if already this year some 350, 60,000 people have entered the Schengen area as part of this wave of migration. What kind of proportion of that influx would be covered by the quotas system? Would the quota system only apply to countries on Schengen's or the EU's external borders, or would it apply to countries like Germany, which says that it's going to see a quadrupling of the number of asylum applications by the end of this year? Can you just give us a bit more detail about these new ambitious proposals that are going to build on the foresight and vision of Mr. Juncker in May to finally solve this crisis?
So the proposal that we came forward with immediately after presenting the European agenda a week later was indeed for Italy and Greece, for these were the two countries where we saw an immediate and emergency situation that needed to be addressed imminently. The proposal that we want to come forward now with, which we had always said we would do by the end of the year and which we are now accelerating the work on, is for a more permanent system in the sense that for each and every crisis that occurs, and in whichever member state that crisis occurs, a system would be automatically triggered, whereby we would be able to redistribute, to relocate a proportion, and it will always be a proportion. It was never going to be alleviating entirely the pressure on a member state or overtaking their responsibility. It will always be relocating a proportion of the people in genuine need of international protection and sharing them amongst other EU member states on the basis of a fair distribution key. Of course, all opt-outs apply to justice and home affairs measures, which means in this case the UK and Ireland have opt-in rights, meaning that they can choose to participate if they so wish. Denmark has an opt-out and would not participate in the measures.
Yes, please.
Hi, here, Nikolai, EU Observer. You had mentioned the common EU rules on asylum, but there's also the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, which makes a direct reference to dignity and non-discrimination. Surely that's been breached quite a few times. I mean, this morning, for instance, the Czech police rounded up, I think, around 200 refugees, arrested them, and then proceeded to write their ID numbers on their forearms. Is it possible for you to comment on this?
This is not an incident that we are aware of, so I will not comment directly on it. More generally, the Charter of Fundamental Rights is binding on EU member states when they apply EU law. The European Union is not in itself a fundamental rights enforcer. Of course, we do have European law in the matter of asylum, and there are common standards for the manner in which migrants are received and are treated and how their applications are processed, of course, in full respect of their dignity and their fundamental rights.
Okay, I think No, not quite. Yes, please, go ahead. No. First at the back and then at the front. Yes, go ahead. Matthew, is it you? Yeah.
I wonder if I could possibly draw you on the comments of the Austrian Chancellor Faymann and MPs in Germany. They're suggesting that there's a read over between the British idleness or lack of participation in terms of common asylum policies and the British request for a renegotiation, suggesting that inaction on one means that they can't expect anything on the other. Would you endorse that view? Do you see any conflation or crossover between these two areas?
I think that this is part of this game blame that we said that we're not very keen in engaging ourselves. What matters now for us is to work together for a solution. And I think the time is ripe, and everything that will be needed for a solution is already there. Yes, please.
Just a couple of specifics on the visit to Athens and Kos. You said yesterday, I think, that the I's hadn't been dotted and the T's crossed in terms of the authority. Has any of the 30 million been dispersed? Is the Commission in a position to do that? And I remember the Commissioner saying probably 10 days ago now that he was expecting Greece to activate the civil mechanism, and I don't think that's happened. Could you confirm whether those things have happened?
So, indeed, in relation to Greece, there were 4 things that Commissioner Αβραμόπουλος outlined in the letter that he has sent yesterday to the Greek authorities, 4 areas that where we expect and we are counting on the Greek authorities to move on. The first is that they do need to finalise the confirmation of the responsible budgetary authority such that we would be able to disburse the first amount of pre-financing under our long-term multi-annual funding for migration. The second is that we would like them to submit requests for emergency funding. You'll remember that in May we doubled the amount of emergency funding that we have available to give to member states, and of course countries like Greece is what we had in mind, so we would like to receive a request. Thirdly, we need a roadmap for the deployment of the hotspot system, and that is also why the meeting with the 4 agencies in Athens and in Kos will be important as well. And lastly, we indeed encourage the Greek authorities to submit a request for the activation of the civil protection mechanism. As I said, we are very well aware of the difficult economic and political situation in the country, and so we're committed to working with the Greek authorities to move forward on all of these 4 areas.
But let us, if I may complete, Natasha, let us hope that this visit Thursday and Friday would also be an opportunity with the 2 key players of the Commission on the ground, that at the end of this visit, all the T's and the I's and the dots are clearly completed. Yes, yeah.
Vas-y, oui.
J'ai 2 questions, si tu permets, sur le même sujet, mais qui concernent 2 pays différents. D'abord, à propos de la visite de M. Orban demain. J'avoue ne pas avoir très bien compris hier si cette visite était programmée ou si elle doit être consacrée notamment au débat sur les migrants. Et est-ce que le président Juncker a, compte tenu de la situation qu'on a évoquée en Hongrie, en Tchéquie, est-ce que le président Juncker a un message à faire passer à M. Orban demain? Par ailleurs, est-ce que nous aurons un contact direct? Est-ce qu'il y a une conférence de presse après cette rencontre? Et deuxième question, si tu permets, certains responsables politiques belges et flamands en l'occurrence envisagent qu'en échange des allocations qu'ils toucheraient à leur arrivée, des réfugiés soient obligés de travailler, de fournir des services d'intérêt généraux. Est-ce qu'il y a quelque part dans la réglementation européenne quelque chose qui interdit ou favorise ce genre de choses?
D'accord. Sur la première question, sur la visite du Premier ministre Orban, évidemment, cette visite a lieu dans un contexte très spécifique d'une crise migratoire auquel se confronte la Hongrie. Donc cette rencontre a l'objectif de pouvoir discuter de ces questions ensemble et de voir en quelle manière la Commission européenne peut fournir un soutien à la Hongrie. Il n'y aura pas de point presse suite à la réunion, mais bien sûr, comme d'habitude, on est là pour vous donner un aperçu de ce qui a été discuté. Deuxièmement, quant aux règles européennes sur les demandeurs d'asile, la législation européenne précise qu'un demandeur d'asile, pendant que leur demande est en train d'être examinée par un État membre, leur dignité doit être respectée. C'est ce qui veut dire qu'on doit évidemment lui fournir à manger et à loger. Les États membres peuvent le faire directement ou ils peuvent donner un financement pour que les demandeurs d'asile le fassent eux-mêmes. Quant au droit de travail, ça c'est quelque chose qui est en effet reste un domaine qui est légiféré au niveau national et les règles diffèrent d'un État membre à un autre si un demandeur d'asile peut travailler pendant que leurs demandes sont en cours d'examination.
Okay, let's try to round it up, avoid being repetitive. Yes, please, on issues, angles not covered. Go ahead.
Tamás Kugyela, Index, Hungary. In view to Prime Minister Orban's visit tomorrow, what is the amount of emergency asylum funding that was requested by Hungary, and when is a decision expected about when it could be actually sent to Budapest?
Hungary submitted a request for 8 million in emergency funding under the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund to help increase the reception capacities in Hungary. As we said, we are fast-tracking the request. The meeting tomorrow will be an opportunity, evidently, to discuss it between the highest political level. But I also remind you that Commissioner Αβραμόπουλος is headed to Budapest on Monday, which will also be a timely opportunity for announcements.
Yes, first.
Yes, from TV2 Denmark. I have a question. As far as we know, there's also a meeting today here in Brussels between the EU Commission, people from the EU Commission and EASO, and also member states. Can you tell us more about the agenda for the meeting and if there will be any sort of results today?
So at the Home Affairs Council that took place on the 20th of July, we discussed with member states the possibility of having a common EU list on safe countries of origin. So we have these lists already. Member states themselves and individually have already named some countries as safe, meaning that they can fast track the asylum applications of nationals from these countries. What we would like to do, and this is actually something that we proposed before, many years ago and was unfortunately not able to be passed, is to have a common list. And notably what we had in mind was countries that are candidates to be members of the European Union. It cannot be that their nationals are then requesting asylum in the European Union. So this is the idea, and at this meeting on the 20th of July, we received the political backing from the ministers. We said that the Commission in September would come forward with a proposal for this common EU list, a legislative proposal. But in the meantime, the member states in the Council tasked the European Asylum Support Office with already seeking to coordinate the countries that are on national lists. So that is what this meeting is about today. It's a first level of coordination led by the European Asylum Support Office with member states at the working level. As it is a working level and as we are coming forward with our proposal very shortly afterwards, I would not expect to see any big announcements coming out of this meeting today.
James will close the migration chapter of the day.
Thanks, Mαργαρίτης. Just reading between the lines here. So the Commission's going to propose a permanent system to redistribute migrants triggered by something. So when is that announcement coming, and what is going to be this trigger exactly? Thanks.
What triggers and what threshold we set as an emergency situation will evidently be one of the details that will be presented when we come forward with our proposal, so I wouldn't want to preempt that now. When we had always said that we would come forward with the proposal by the end of the year, we've now said that we have accelerated this work, evidently in a view of being able to discuss it at the Home Affairs Council that has been called for the 14th of September.
Okay, we can thank Natasha and switch to other subjects. Yes, Sandra, go ahead.